Hi, I'm Andrew Torget with Texas History for Teachers. Starting in the 1690s, the Spanish began trying to set up settlements in Texas. And as it turned out, they would keep on trying for the next 130 years, all the way until 1821. Now, we usually call this period the Spanish colonial era because the Spanish were in Texas and they were trying to control the region. But here's the truth that those Spaniards would probably prefer that you didn't know. They were never, ever, even remotely in charge of most of Texas for pretty much that entire time. The Spanish, in fact, never managed to do much more than establish just 3 small villages in the region. The vast majority of Texas was controlled instead by the many different tribes of American Indians, also called Native Americans, who lived in Texas. Now, these were groups like the Comanches, Apaches, Caddos, Karankawas, Wichitas, among many others, and they often proved far more powerful in Texas than the Spaniards. So the question is, why? Why was it that the Spanish, with all of their military might, could never tame Texas, while American Indians remained so powerful? Well, maybe it had something to do with the way that Spain tried to settle the region. You see, the Spanish relied heavily on something called the mission system in settling Texas, and it never worked very well. Now, the basic idea was pretty simple. A mission was built to be like a little town or a boarding school where Indians could go to live and learn how to be just like the Spaniards. Spain figured that if they could train Indians to eat, dress, worship, and pay taxes like good Spaniards, that could be a great way to convert what they considered to be hostile Indians into loyal Spanish subjects. And so they set up missions all over Texas. And to protect them, the Spanish also built forts, which they called presidios, that would guard the missions and hopefully bring more Spaniards into the region to serve in these forts. But guess what? The missions never worked. In fact, they were a pretty colossal failure. Why? Well, there were a lot of reasons, but it all came down to something pretty basic. Most Indians never wanted to become Spaniards. They were perfectly happy with their own way of life, and they wanted to continue being members of their own particular tribes. And the fact was, there were a lot more American Indians than Spaniards living in Texas. Throughout this entire period, there were never much more than maybe 4,000 Spaniards in the entire region. But there were tens of thousands of Indians, perhaps as many as 30,000, living amongst numerous tribes spread all across Texas. The most powerful might have been the Comanches, who came to Texas in the 1730s, which, if you're keeping score, was after the Spanish had arrived. You could find wealthy cattle trading villages in East Texas, seasonal fishing villages of the Karankawas along the coast, Apache bands hunting bison in the west, amongst numerous other groups. And many of these groups did not like the Spanish. And so for the next 100 years or so, Spaniards in Texas often found themselves in fights with local tribes. Comanches and Apaches, for example, frequently raided their enemies, and both usually saw the Spanish as enemies, and therefore they raided Spanish settlements like San Antonio. And violence, as it turned out, was a major problem that Spaniards in Texas faced pretty much all the time, and not just from American Indians. When Mexican rebels began fighting for independence from Spain in the early 1800s, those fights came to Texas. This led, in fact, to the bloodiest battle in all of Texas history, the Battle of Medina, which happened in 1813 and killed more than 1,300 people. And then after that, there were even more Indian raids, followed by a series of small-scale invasions from the United States, which, as you can imagine, led to even more fighting and chaos. So by the time you get to 1820, the end of the so-called Spanish era, Spain was clearly not in charge and had not established control over Texas. What they had instead were just 3 small settlements: Nacogdoches in East Texas, La Bahia, which will later be called Goliad, close to the coast, and San Antonio. And that's it. Most Spaniards who lived in Texas at the time were incredibly poor. They struggled to survive by farming and ranching, and they lived in constant fear of powerful nearby tribes. In fact, by 1820, some were talking about abandoning Texas altogether, which leaves us with some really important questions. Did the Spanish fail in Texas? Or were 3 small settlements good enough for the King of Spain, so long as other countries didn't try to claim Texas for themselves? How did tribes like the Comanche and Apache remain so powerful in Texas during this time? And perhaps most important of all, what on earth could Mexico do with this mess in Texas when they became independent of Spain in 1821? How could Mexico and the new government in Mexico City find a way to control Texas if the Spanish never could?